everyone! Today, let's join me to experience what a normal subway ride in New York is like. While we ride, I'll tell you the story of Strangers on a Train by Patricia Highsmith. This psychological thriller is a story about Guy Haines, a successful architect, and Charles Anthony Bruno, a wealthy but psychologically unstable young man. It all starts when the two strangers meet on a train. One man proposes a perfect deal. Each will kill a person the other wants to eliminate, so no one is suspected. It's a dark story that explores human nature and a bizarre murder plot. It was the inspiration for the famous film of the same name by Alfred Hitchcock. I'll divide this story into 5 parts for you to easily follow along. Chapter 1: The Fateful Encounter. The rhythmic screeching of the train wheels on the track was like a monotonous, sorrowful song, perfectly in sync with the weariness in Guy Haines' soul. He sat in the train car trying to find some peace during his journey from Washington, D.C. to Texas. The thin jacket felt too tight and the air in the car was stifling. His mind, however, was trapped in a place even more confining: his impending meeting with Miriam. Miriam, the estranged wife he had never truly escaped, felt like a sinking anchor. Though they had been living apart for years, she stubbornly refused to sign the divorce papers, imprisoning him in a false marriage and preventing him from moving on with Anne. Anne was the love of his life. All he wanted was to be free, to live a peaceful and happy life. But every time he thought of Miriam, a wave of anger and powerlessness surged, swallowing every ounce of hope. As the train swayed, a strange man approached and sat in the seat opposite him, his blonde hair neatly combed back but a little disheveled. His eyes were blue, too blue, and held a strange, fixated gaze. Despite his expensive suit, it was wrinkled and looked as though it had been worn on a long journey. The man sat down and offered a smile so wide it seemed to reach his ears. "You're Guy Haines, aren't you?" he asked, his voice so confident and bizarrely friendly. Guy was startled. He didn't know this man. "Yes, I am," he replied, a cautious tone in his voice. The man's appearance was so gaudy it was almost ridiculous. "I'm Charles Anthony Bruno," he said, as if introducing himself to a longtime friend. "A friend of mine told me all about you." Guy frowned. "What friend?" Bruno winked, a sly smile on his face. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that I know you. You're an architect, aren't you? And you're on your way to see Miriam." Bruno said the name with a terrifying familiarity, as if he had been there, witnessing every argument and every bit of pain Miriam had caused. Guy felt uneasy. He tried to steer the conversation in another direction, but Bruno kept returning to the subject of Miriam. He spoke in a voice full of seeming empathy but laced with a dark, morbid curiosity, as if he were interrogating a patient. "She is a barrier," Bruno whispered, leaning forward. "She's an obstacle." Guy felt a deep discomfort. He just wanted to be silent, but then Bruno leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, hypnotic tone. "I have an idea," he said. Guy's heart pounded. A cold chill ran down his spine, a premonition that something terrible was about to happen. Bruno then presented his perfect deal, an idea so deranged and brutal, Guy couldn't believe his ears. "You kill my father, and I'll kill your wife," he proposed. He explained the logic meticulously, as if he were discussing a recipe. "You have no connection to my father. The police will never find a motive. And I have no connection to your wife. The crime will be undetectable. It's the perfect crime." Bruno spoke of his father with an intense hatred, a wealthy, domineering man who had controlled his life. He spoke of Miriam with cold contempt. To him, they were just obstacles that needed to be removed. Bruno went on and on, as if Guy had already agreed and they were just discussing the method. He pulled out evidence of Miriam's existence, photos and letters. He knew too much. Guy felt cornered, with no escape. Every word from Bruno was like a noose tightening around his neck. He spoke of freedom, of peace, of justice. These words sounded twisted and monstrous coming from Bruno's mouth. He couldn't believe a person could conceive of such a sick idea. I don't know, Guy stammered, trying to stand, but a trembling in his legs prevented him from moving. Yes, you do, Bruno said, his eyes gleaming. He pulled out a small piece of paper, wrote down Guy's address and phone number, and pressed it into his hand. Think about it. This is the solution to all our problems. Think of Anne, of the life you want. It's all within your reach, as long as we do this. Guy stumbled out of the train car. His heart was a bird trapped in his chest. He crumpled the paper in his hand, throwing it into a trash can on the platform, as if to erase all traces of the horrifying encounter. He tried to convince himself that Bruno was just a crazy man, and that nothing would come of it. But deep down, a chilling feeling lingered. Was this offer merely a joke? Or was it a terrifying promise, waiting to be fulfilled? A trap he had just unwittingly walked into. Chapter 2. The beginning of the nightmare. Time passed, and Guy Haines had almost forgotten the strange encounter on the train. His life seemed to be returning to its rightful course. He spent most of his time working in his design studio, immersing himself in blueprints and models, finding solace in the straight lines and precise numbers. His evenings were for Anne. With her, he could forget all his worries, forget the name Miriam and that crazy man. He was convinced Bruno was just a lunatic, a brief nightmare he had been lucky enough to escape. The piece of paper had been crumpled and thrown into a trash can on the platform, and with it, he believed he had discarded all ties to the incident. That piece lasted for a few weeks, and then it shattered like a thin pane of glass. It was a Friday afternoon. As Guy sat in his office reviewing a few final designs, the phone rang, and a voice from one of Miriam's relatives spoke. "Something bad has happened, Guy," the person said, their voice hesitant. Guy frowned, his heart beginning to beat erratically. He tried to reassure himself, thinking perhaps Miriam had caused some trouble with the paperwork again. But then the words struck him, clear and cruel. "Miriam, she's dead. Strangled." The world around Guy collapsed. The phone slipped from his hand, hitting the desk with a dull thud. He could hear the person on the other end calling his name, but he couldn't reply. His mind was blank, containing nothing but the single name dancing in his thoughts. Bruno. A cold horror enveloped Guy, a fear far greater than grief. He knew Bruno had done it. He had fulfilled one half of the perfect deal, and now he was trapped. He couldn't go to the police. What would he tell them? A strange man on a train killed my ex-wife because I wouldn't kill his father. The police would laugh at him, and then they would arrest him as the prime suspect. He had a clear motive. He wanted a divorce to be with Anne. The police would assume he had hired a hitman. Bruno had calculated everything perfectly. He had committed a murder with no obvious connection to the victim, leaving Guy to be the #1 suspect. Guy lived in torment for the following days. He attended Miriam's funeral, standing among her relatives, feeling like an imposter. Everyone's eyes were on him, as if they were searching for a sign of sorrow, but inside him was only terror. He was afraid Bruno would show up, afraid he would call his name, afraid he would do something to confirm their partnership. And that fear became a reality. A few days after the funeral, Guy's phone rang in the middle of the night. When he answered, there was no voice, only the sound of deep, slow breathing, the breathing of a person waiting. Guy hung up, his heart pounding. He knew who it was. Then, anonymous letters began to appear in his mailbox. They contained no direct threats, only photos of Miriam with carefully written mocking captions. Her last journey was a sad one, but we have completed half of our work. The photos made Guy feel sick. He knew Bruno was reveling in his fear. Guy's life became a nightmare. He looked around with a constant sense of paranoia. Every black car that drove past, every blonde-haired man made him jump. He was afraid to go outside, afraid of unexpected calls, afraid of the letters in his mailbox. The peace he once had completely vanished. One evening, while having dinner with Anne at a familiar restaurant, guys saw Bruno. He was sitting at a table across from them, sipping a drink and staring intently at him. His eyes were mischievous, like a cat toying with a mouse. A chill ran down Guy's spine. He squeezed Anne's hand under the table, trying to suppress his panic. Bruno did nothing. He simply watched him and offered a knowing smile, as if to say, "We're a team, you and me." When he returned home, Guy found another letter. This time it contained only a single address, 3015 Westover Street, Dallas, Texas.
It was the address of Bruno's father's house. Bruno said nothing, but Guy understood. The first part of the deal had been done. Now it was his turn. Guy realized he wasn't just a victim. He had become an accomplice, trapped in a deadly game created by a psychopath. His life was no longer his own. Bruno had acquired him, and now he wanted Guy to pay his debt. Chapter 3. The Spiral of Psychological Collapse. In the following days, Guy Haynes' life was no longer his own. It became a continuous chain of surveillance, psychological terror, and being pushed to the very limit of his endurance. The slip of paper with Bruno's father's address and the fake key were not just inanimate objects in his coat pocket. They felt like heavy blocks of lead burning through the fabric and pressing down on his chest, a curse, an unrelenting reminder of the blood debt he had to pay. Guy looked at them, disgusted, yet unable to throw them away, for doing so felt like throwing away his own life. Bruno had become a haunting specter in his mind, controlling him without having to appear in person. The late-night phone calls became more frequent. They rang not just in the middle of the night, but at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, in those moments when Guy had almost managed to drift into sleep. Each time the phone rang, Guy's heart would leap into his throat, his chest tightening. He would answer, and there was only deep, slow, and steady breathing on the other end. That breath was not that of a human being, but of a demon savoring his fear. He would hang up, but the sound of that breathing echoed in his mind, making it impossible for him to fall back asleep. The torment wasn't confined to the 4 walls of his apartment. Bruno began to show up in the places where Guy felt safest. One Saturday afternoon, as Guy was walking in the park, trying to find some fresh air, he saw Bruno. He was sitting on a bench opposite, sipping a cup of coffee, his eyes never leaving Guy. He didn't wave or smile. He simply sat there, like a dark shadow waiting. The next day, when Guy was shopping at a store, he saw Bruno standing at the end of an aisle. He simply winked and then vanished. Bruno's presence required no words. It was a constant threat, a declaration that he knew everything Guy did, everywhere Guy went. Guy began to feel he could never escape. The vast city of New York suddenly shrank into a cage, and he was the bird being watched. The immense psychological pressure caused Guy's life to start unraveling. He became irritable and unstable. Arguments with Anne became more frequent. Anne loved him, but she couldn't understand his sudden change. She saw him become withdrawn, mysterious, always staring into space, and flinching every time the phone rang. Guy couldn't explain it to her. He couldn't talk about the deal, about Miriam, and about the man who was stalking him. He turned to alcohol. Drinking became a temporary anesthesia, helping him forget the fear and guilt. But alcohol didn't solve the problem. It only made everything worse. In his drunken stupors, he became reckless and desperate. He once considered driving to a police station and confessing everything. But then another fear surged. The fear of being judged, of losing everything. Anne, his career, his life. And then, Bruno pushed everything to a new level. One afternoon, a large parcel was delivered to Guy's office. Inside, he found not only the key, but a long, handwritten letter in capital letters filled with Bruno's twisted philosophy. "My dear friend, I have waited. We have a deal. One half is done. Now it is your turn. You think we are different? We are not. We are both men who dare to act for our own happiness. You got Anne. You got your freedom. That was my gift. Now it is your turn to give me my gift. This is our fate. This is our destiny. You and I." He read every word, feeling as though Bruno was standing right behind him, laughing maniacally. He had understood him. He had laid bare Guy's deepest desires and used them as a weapon against him. The key was no longer just a tool, it was a symbol of his complete surrender. He was tired of the fear, tired of running, tired of his life that was slowly falling apart. Guy looked at the key and the piece of paper with the address. He knew he had no other choice. Bruno had his life in his hands, and he would not let go. He had tried to fight, but he had lost. He had tried to cling to his morals, but he had failed. To reclaim his freedom, to end this nightmare, he had to do something he never imagined. He would go to Dallas. He would open that door. He would complete his part of the deal. And as he reached into his pocket and felt the coldness of the key, he knew that the Guy Haines he once was had died long ago. All that remained was a stranger preparing for the darkest journey of his life.
Chapter 4. The Final Crime. The slip of paper with the Dallas address was no longer a threat, it was a verdict. Weary from sleepless nights, from the haunting sound of Bruno's breathing over the phone, and from the collapse of his life and his relationship with Anne, Guy finally surrendered. He bought a plane ticket to Dallas. It was a terrifying journey. Throughout the flight, he felt like a ghost, detached from his body. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from a cold, quiet acceptance, as if he were headed for a predetermined date with destiny. He no longer thought about morality, about the law, or about the consequences. He thought of only one thing: ending this torment, ending Bruno. That night, a winter rainstorm in Dallas poured down as if to wash away all sin. But Guy Haines was walking straight into the darkness. With the fake key in his hand, he snuck into Bruno Scother's house. The large house was eerily silent, cloaked in shadows, with only the light from a street lamp glinting off the raindrops on the windows. Taking a deep breath, Guy took the key from his pocket. His hands were no longer trembling. He inserted the key into the lock, and it fit perfectly. The small click echoed in the quiet night, like an invitation. Bruno had planned everything meticulously, as if he had been there, waiting for him. Guy stepped inside, a scent of old books and faint cigar smoke greeting him. He moved silently, step by step up the stairs. Each wooden step creaked softly, a whispered warning. When he reached the bedroom door, he saw it was ajar. The faint moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating a part of the room. He could see old man Bruno sleeping soundly, his white hair a stark contrast against the dark pillow. Guy stood there, looking at the sleeping man. He wasn't a monster. He was just an ordinary old man, sleeping. For a second, 2 seconds, Guy hesitated. He could turn back. He could run. He could call the police. But then the image of Miriam's face, pale and with wide, dead eyes, appeared in his mind. And then Bruno's face, his sly smile on the train, his slow breathing over the phone. He had come too far to turn back. He was a coward who had accepted the deal. Now he had to pay the price. In a moment of utter despair, he acted. He entered the room, finding his way to the bed, and put his hands on the old man's throat, just as Bruno had done to Miriam. It wasn't an act of hatred or rage.
but one of pure desperation, an action necessary to end his own nightmare. It all happened quickly and coldly. There were no screams, only a brief struggle, and then silence. After it was done, Guy was left trembling. He tried to grab a few valuable items to stage a robbery, but his hands were shaking too violently. He dropped a watch, knocked over a vase. He wasn't a professional killer. He was just an ordinary man who had been pushed to the edge. Panic consumed him. He ran out of the house, ran into the pouring rain, a murderer, a living ghost. Guy returned home to New York utterly exhausted in body and spirit. He had done it. He had killed a man. His entire world had changed. He looked in the mirror and saw a stranger's face. His eyes were empty, lifeless. He told himself that it was all over. He had paid his debt to Bruno. Now he would finally be able to live in peace. He had accepted one crime in exchange for his freedom. But that peace never came. Bruno, the psychopath, had shown his true colors. He never had any intention of letting Guy go. To him, the deal wasn't an exchange, it was a game. He had found a new toy and he would never let it go. As soon as Guy returned, the phone call started again, but this time, there was no breathing. "You did well, Guy. We are done. Now we are a real team. Forever." Bruno began to toy with Guy more cruelly than ever before. He sent Guy clippings from the newspaper about his father's death, circling the parts that mentioned the police suspected a robbery. He would call and tell dark jokes about the death, and when Guy tried to hang up, he would threaten him, "Don't hang up. If you do, I'll have to tell the police you did it. I can make them believe we planned it together." The obsession didn't lessen. It simply changed form. Guy was no longer just afraid of being killed, but also afraid of being exposed. He realized he had fallen into a trap deeper than he could have ever imagined. Bruno didn't need him to do anything else. He just wanted to hold him in his grasp, in his control, forever. The final crime didn't bring him peace. It brought him into an eternal nightmare. Guy had become a killer, but he was also a victim. He had lost everything for a hollow promise, a freedom that he would never have.
Chapter 5: The Tragic End. After returning from Dallas, Guy Haynes lived like a ghost. The horror of the crime and Bruno's relentless torment had stripped him of every feeling. He was no longer paranoid because he had accepted the truth. Bruno was always there, and the police were closing in. Every day, Guy lived in a state of utter dread, a horrific weight. His life was now just a tragic countdown, waiting for the inevitable end. His relationship with Anne had completely broken down. She couldn't bear his distant and secretive nature. The police, who had been investigating Miriam's murder, began to connect the dots slowly but surely. They found evidence of a phone call from Washington, D.C. to New York on the night Miriam was killed. They discovered that Guy had a clear motive for wanting Miriam to disappear. And they began to investigate his social circles, looking for people he had met during that time. Bruno, with his eccentric demeanor, fell onto their radar. But they had no solid evidence. Everything was just a series of suspicious coincidences. And then the final coincidence arrived at a bustling, noisy carnival. Thousands of people poured into the streets, music blared from all directions, and laughter mingled in the air. Amidst the chaotic crowd, Guy saw Bruno. For a brief moment, he felt a strange impulse. It wasn't fear, but a burst of anger, a desperate desire to confront the man who had ruined his life. Guy pushed through the crowd toward him. He saw Bruno standing in front of a stall, a bottle in his hand, his face flushed and his eyes gleaming from the alcohol. "Bruno!" he roared. Bruno turned around, a look of pure glee on his face. "Ah, my friend, where have you been? We're a team that made history." Guy's restraint shattered. "Shut up," he screamed. "You ruined my life. All your promises were lies." Bruno laughed loudly. "Lies? You got Anne. You got your freedom. Isn't that what you wanted? And I got my fun. Did you think I wanted a house for my father? I just wanted this game. I turned a little architect into a murderer. You see, I won." The insane, arrogant confession rang out amidst the music and noise of the festival. Guy lunged at him, knocking the bottle from Bruno's hand. The two men wrestled, attracting the attention of a few people nearby. Bruno, in his drunken state, slipped and fell, hitting his head hard against a brick wall. He collapsed, unconscious. The police and an ambulance arrived quickly. As Guy stood there, stunned, an officer ran over saying that Bruno had briefly regained consciousness but was in critical condition. They put him on a stretcher and loaded him into the ambulance. Guy ran after it, trying to catch one last look at Bruno. Before the ambulance door closed, Bruno looked into Guy's eyes. He smiled, a sly, knowing smile, and whispered something to the police officer standing beside the stretcher. The officer nodded. Guy was held for questioning. He lied, saying they had only argued because Bruno had spilled wine on him. But then he saw the police officer's eyes change. They were filled with scrutiny and suspicion. He knew Bruno had said something. A few hours later, as Guy sat in an interrogation room, another officer walked in. "I have some bad news," he said. "Charles Bruno has died." He paused, looking straight at Guy. Before he died, he said one thing. He said that a man killed his father, and that man was you. Guy's entire world came crashing down. Bruno had won. Even in death, he had played his game to the very end, and that final confession was his ultimate trump card. Bruno had revealed the truth, but not out of remorse. He had done it to ensure Guy would be trapped forever, to prove he was the true winner of this psychological game. When the police presented the evidence they had gathered, the phone call, the trip to Dallas, Guy knew there was no escape. He didn't resist. He didn't make excuses. He was tired of everything. In an empty voice, he began to confess. Every word was a release, an end to the nightmare. The book ends with Guy Haines, a man who once had everything, being stripped of it all. He had sold his soul to a devil, hoping for a freedom that would never come. He had become a killer, but he was also a victim. The conclusion wasn't a triumph of justice, but the tragic end of a soul that had been completely ruined. That's the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you for taking this walk with me. See you again on our next trip with more amazing book summaries. Goodbye for now.